I have a few thank yous before we begin. I would like to thank our superintendent, Dr. Christopher McGinley, for co-sponsoring this program with the ISC. Thank you. I would also like to thank the ISC Executive Committee, who put in tremendous effort to make this program happen tonight. So thank you all for that. And finally, I would like to thank Dr. Jody Mundell, who is sitting next to our speaker, Dr. Judith Owens. It's Jody who suggested that we contact Judy Owens to speak here tonight. Jody is a professor of psychology at St. Joe's University and the associate director of the Sleep Center at CHOP, and so our own local pediatric sleep expert. And thank you very much. Without you, we wouldn't have Judy here tonight. Hopefully all of you have gotten note cards and pencils when you came in, so if you have any questions that come up during the program, write them down. We'll be collecting them during or after Dr. Owens' presentation, and then we'll have a question and answer session. We may have some breakout sessions with administrators following the program, but if the program with question and answer runs to 8:30 or beyond, we are not going to have those breakout sessions today, and instead we will have them next Monday night, April 7th, here at 7 p.m., and we'll send out a notice in the listservs as to where they will be. We don't want to go to the breakout sessions when we have Dr. Owens here if we can we'd rather have the full presentation and question and answer if we run that long. Finally, the program is being recorded and will be available later this week, maybe the end of the week or early next week on the district website and on the local cable television channel. I started to become interested in the issue of sleep many years ago when I was a freshman in college in a huge introductory psychology class, and the professor had a unit on adolescent sleep. This professor, who taught a class of 2,000 students, refused to teach any class that started before 10 a.m. based on his sleep research. Given the number of students in the class, his research, and others' research, and the clout he had at that university, the university acceded to his request, and all of his classes started at 10 or thereafter. Fast forward 20 plus years, and I have two of my own teenagers at Harrington High School, and in living color, every week, I'm experiencing what I learned those decades ago in that freshman psychology class. For those of you who have teenagers, I'm sure many of you experience as the week goes on, it just gets harder and harder. My daughter observed one day on one of those 2-hour delay days, which we've been graced with many this year, that kids were actually talking to each other on the bus. She said that never happened. There was always total silence on the bus, but on the 2-hour delay days, it was totally different. Our third child is about to start Harrington in the fall, and I really would like to learn ways, I'm hoping tonight from Dr. Owens, to make her experience in high school, to help her to get more sleep in high school than my older two children got. So that's one reason tonight's program is of such interest to me, and I'm so glad that we have Dr. Owens here. So I have Dr. Owens' brief bio, which I will read most of to you. Dr. Judith Owens is Director of Sleep Medicine at Children's National Medical Center in Washington, D.C., and Professor of Pediatrics at George Washington University School of Medicine and Health Sciences. She is an internationally recognized authority on pediatric sleep and the author of over 125 original research and review articles in peer-reviewed journals, chapters, and books on the topic. Her particular research interests are in the neurobehavioral and health consequences of sleep problems in children, pharmacologic treatment of pediatric sleep disorders, sleep health education, and cultural and psychosocial issues impacting on sleep. Dr. Owens has served 2 terms as the chair of the American Academy of Sleep Medicine section on childhood sleep disorders and development, and received the AASM Excellence in Education Award in 2006 and the AASM Public Policy Advocacy Award in 2012. She is currently on the board of directors of the Society of Behavioral Sleep Medicine and the president and chief medical officer of the American Sleep Apnea Association. She is the editor-in-chief of Behavioral Sleep Medicine and is on the editorial boards of Sleep Medicine Reviews and the Journal of Developmental and Behavioral Pediatrics. Dr. Owens has co-authored both a book for physicians on pediatric sleep disorders and a parent book on sleep, Take Charge of Your Child's Sleep, the all-in-one resource for solving sleep problems in kids and teens, with Jody Mundell.
You're giving away my slide.
Oh, sorry. But, sorry about that. 2 weeks ago, and we did not plan this, Dr. Owens was featured in a front-page New York Times article entitled "To Keep Teenagers Alert, Schools Let Them Sleep In." And tomorrow morning, Dr. Owens, together with Dr. Mindell, will be featured on WHYY's Radio Times in an interview on this very topic. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Judith Owens.
There we go. All right. Well, it's my very great pleasure to be here with you this evening, and I'm very appreciative of Amy having contacted me through Jody's influence, and delighted to be able to present some of the very compelling, I hope, science that forms the rationale for considering the issue of delaying school start times. So I really want to paint a picture for you of sleep as a public health issue. And that seems kind of odd to frame it that way, but I think hopefully by the end of this presentation you will see that chronic sleep loss as experienced by our high school students has potentially a devastating impact on not only academic performance, but on health and safety measures, including mental health. So what I'd like to cover this evening is some of the normal but very important developmental changes that occur in sleep over adolescence that really forms the scientific basis for a lot of the consequences of chronic sleep loss. And we'll talk about those consequences across the board in terms of what we know in regards to the impact on, as I mentioned, mental health, behavior, substance use, physical health, and safety measures such as drowsy driving. And then finally, we'll spend some time talking about this very important issue of delaying high school start times as a potential mitigating factor to reduce the impact of chronic sleep loss in teenagers. So when you think about what's happening to sleep in adolescence, there's virtually a perfect storm of different factors that are conspiring to rob teenagers of sleep. The first is a profound change in what we call circadian rhythms that occur in conjunction with pubertal changes rather than chronological age. So some of these circadian rhythm changes are also going to be present in middle school students, particularly in 7th and 8th graders, because of the timing of the onset of puberty. And right around that time, we see a shift, a normal shift, to a later fall asleep time and wake up time. So on a practical level, this means that the average adolescent has a great deal of difficulty falling asleep much before 11 p.m. on a regular basis. Now, of course, there are many other competing priorities for sleep time in adolescence, including homework burden, after-school extracurricular activities, employment, screen time, social networking, that also add to this issue of later bedtimes. And in addition to that, the exposure to light in the evening, so light from a computer screen or a television screen, can be bright enough to suppress your body's production of a hormone called melatonin, which is one of the principal biological markers of sleep and what helps you to fall asleep in the evening. So all of these things, competing priorities, the normal delay in circadian rhythms, and light exposure in the evening conspire to move bedtimes later in the average high school student. Now, right around the same time that all of these are happening. High schools in the United States and many middle schools as well typically start earlier than elementary schools, which is the exact opposite of what would be in the best interests in terms of health and performance of adolescents. So teenagers are biologically programmed to wake up for the day at around 8 o'clock in the morning. And so early start times are essentially requiring students to wake up for the day and function optimally and be alert right at the time when their biological clock is telling them to be asleep. And what this does is this robs students not only of sleep in general, but of particular stages of sleep, specifically REM or rapid eye movement or dream sleep, because that period of sleep occurs largely in the latter third of the night. So having to wake too early for the day selectively decreases the amount of REM sleep, which we know is absolutely critical for learning and memory. So this is a little diagram. I'd just like to digress for a minute to kind of outline the basics of what we call sleep regulation, because I think if you kind of understand how this process works, it helps to explain why teenagers who don't get enough sleep have such difficulty. So the two things that determine how sleepy or alert we are at any given time of the day are what's called the sleep drive, which is essentially dependent upon how long you've been awake. So the longer you've been awake, the stronger your drive to sleep is. And human beings seem to meet come up against a threshold at about 15 to 16 hours of continuous wakefulness. That's when your performance starts to deteriorate. And then over the course of a normal night's sleep, the sleep drive is dissipated gradually. Now, the other process which is regulating sleep and wakefulness is what we call the circadian drive. And that is a predictable pattern of relative peaks and troughs of alertness and sleepiness that occur throughout the 24-hour day. So in the early afternoon, we tend to have sort of a surge of alertness. And then between 3 and 5, siesta time, there's a biological reason why we feel tired during that time of the day. And then there is a burst of alertness, which we call the forbidden zone, or the second wind phenomenon, which occurs just before the time that our bodies are ready to fall asleep. So it offsets that building sleep drive and allows us to stay awake that additional hour just before bedtime. Now, in adolescence, that whole circadian rhythm is shifted later. So when we talk about a circadian trough, so we have this time between 3 and 5 in the afternoon, but also between 3 and 5 in the morning, which is the most profound dip in alertness that we experience throughout the 24-hour day. And if that's shifted just a little bit in adolescence, you are asking them to wake up for the day at the time when their bodies are most asleep and least alert. So what do adolescents do to try to address this issue? They sleep in on weekends, right? In an attempt to make up for this chronic sleep loss experienced Monday through Friday. So we see this increasing discrepancy between bedtimes and wake times on weekdays and weekends. And we're beginning to understand that it's not just how much sleep you get, it's when you sleep and how regular your sleep patterns are. So this practice of sleeping in on weekends and having a 2 or 3 or more hour discrepancy between your bedtime and wake times Monday through Friday and Saturday and Sunday in and of itself appears to be associated with learning deficits and behavior problems in school. Furthermore, I would make the argument that sleeping later on weekends is not adequate compensation for weekday sleep loss because it doesn't increase your alertness on the days that you're attending school and have to be functioning at your best. Furthermore, this practice of weekend oversleep leads to a misalignment of the circadian rhythms. So that natural delay in bedtime and wake time that occurs with puberty is further exacerbated by this practice of sleeping in on weekends. So, for example, and go back to the graph that I showed you about sleep regulation. If you sleep until 1 o'clock in the afternoon on Sunday, there's no way you can build up your sleep drive to an extent that you will be able to fall asleep at a reasonable hour. Plus, you've also shifted your circadian rhythms to an even later time. And so it's like flying from Philadelphia to LA and back every weekend for these students. And because the human circadian clock is a little bit longer than 24 hours, it's always harder coming back in the eastward direction than it is going in the westward direction. And I'm sure many of you have experienced jet lag and how that feels. That kind of groggy, confused, even having physical symptoms, just not being able to think straight. So these students are in this semi-permanent state of jet lag because it takes about 1 day per time zone crossed to adjust. And so it's Thursday or Friday by the time they kind of get back to baseline. They're even more sleep deprived by the end of the week, and then the whole cycle starts all over again. And we know that this can have an impact on not only daytime sleepiness, but academic performance, depressed mood, that can last through most of the school week. So the bottom line here is that for optimal health, achievement, and safety, and we all want our students to be functioning at their optimal level. That's critical. And we do all kinds of other things to ensure that that happens. The average high school student needs about 9 to 9.25 hours of sleep per night. The average high school student in the United States gets somewhere around 7.25 hours of sleep. And the higher in grades you go, the less sleep students get. So by the time they're seniors in high school and have to be really functioning at the top of their game, they're getting on typically less than 7 hours. So 80% of adolescents, according to the National Sleep Foundation Sleep in America poll back in 2006, were getting less than the recommended amount of sleep on school nights. And by 12th grade, only 3% were getting the optimal amount of sleep. So what's the fallout from all this? So kids are a little bit sleepy in school, they'll recover, and it's only for a few years. Why are we worried about this? Well, we need sleep for a lot of different reasons, and we still haven't elucidated all of the reasons why human beings and all living things need to sleep. But we know, for example, that we need sleep to facilitate memory retention, to react quickly, to work accurately and efficiently. So people who are sleep deprived will get the right answer eventually, but it takes them much longer to get there. And I would make the argument that when students say, I can't possibly get to sleep because I have 5 hours of homework, well, maybe their efficiency is compromised such that it takes them 5 hours to do 3 hours worth of homework, and the whole cycle starts all over again. To think abstractly, be creative, gain insight, and the only thing Unfortunately for us human beings, that replaces sleep is sleep. So in particular, we know that experimentally induced sleep deprivation. So in other words, you bring volunteers into the sleep lab and you curtail their sleep amounts to 4 or 6 or whatever number of hours. And then you look at their performance on different kinds of cognitive tasks. And in some studies, they actually have done what's called functional neuroimaging. So they take pictures of the brains and the brain as it's functioning under these conditions of being rested and sleep loss. So we know that sleep deprivation or sleep restriction has a selective effect on that part of the brain called the prefrontal cortex. And that is an area of the brain that has control over a number of higher level cognitive functions, things like judgment and motivation, the ability to monitor your behavior and modify it in response to perceived consequences, to modulate emotions, to manage frustration, and furthermore, the prefrontal cortex is undergoing profound developmental changes in adolescence, right at the time when these individuals are probably the most sleep deprived in their lives. Sleep deprivation also affects what we call the emotional brain. So this was a particular study in which individuals had their sleep restricted and then were shown some disturbing images, pictorial images. And again, they did functional neuroimaging while they were performing these tasks. And what they found was that under conditions of sleep loss, there was an increased uptake in the area of the brain called the amygdala, which is kind of the house of emotional regulation. And furthermore, that there was a weaker connection between the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala, implying heightened emotion with less control. And when you think of the angst and the drama of adolescence, these kinds of effects of sleep on emotional regulation and control may add further to that situation. And indeed, the National Sleep Foundation poll found that students who got less sleep were more likely to report feeling unhappy, sad, depressed, hopeless, worried, or negative about life. And there have been several studies now which have shown a connection between chronic sleep loss, shorter sleep amounts, and suicidal thoughts. So depression and suicidal thoughts closely associated with sleep loss. Very serious issue. Risk-taking behavior. So another part